the organization was expanding, and I wanted to know what happened. So Tully arranged for me to interview Andy Tartaglino. Andy Tartaglino had been joined the Bureau of Narcotics in 1950. He had risen to become the deputy director of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs in 1968. And when the DEA created, he was one of its most senior officers. He knew everything about the Bureau of Narcotics, the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, and the DEA. He had never given an interview before, but because he was lifelong friends with Tully Alcampora, when Tully sent me to him, Andy agreed to do an interview. It was like, once Andy had agreed to do an interview with me, it was like having an entree into the entire organization. And that was a really big, that was, the most important connection I made in terms of getting access to all these agents. And I ended up interviewing hundreds of them. And it was all because of this CIA guy, Tully, who'd been friends with all these Italian-American narcotic agents. And based on that friendship, Andy Tartaglino agreed to see me. At the same time, Tully was also friends with the first federal narcotic agent who went to work in Saigon, and his name was Fred Dick. Again, Fred Dick was an old-time Bureau of Narcotic agent. He had started working for the Bureau of Narcotics in 1950, just like Andy Tartaglino had. And in 1969, when the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs had just been formed the year before, Fred Dick was assigned as the very first United States federal narcotic agent in Saigon, which was kind of unusual because most of the drugs that were, at that point, most of the heroin and drugs that were reaching the United States had been coming out of Southeast Asia. And the fact that the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs only first assigned an agent there in 1969 was pretty much an indication of how they didn't actually want to conduct any narcotic investigations in Saigon, because any kind of narcotic investigation that you conducted in Saigon was immediately going to lead to all the generals and politicians and police and customs officials who were on the CIA payroll. So Fred had a very dangerous job, and it was a very politically sensitive job. And at the time, Tully was, as I might have mentioned a little earlier, the senior CIA advisor to the top Vietnamese police official in Saigon. And so him and Fred started working together, just like Tully had worked with those Italian-American Bureau of Narcotic agents in Italy for 5 or 6 years, 6 or 7 years. In the early and mid-60s, he started working with Fred. And Tully also introduced me to Fred. And I went and visited Fred down in Florida in around 1989 at the end of this work on the Phoenix program book. And Fred, like Andy Tartaglino, also agreed to talk with me. And Fred gave me at that time a directory of the Association of Former Federal Narcotic Agents. They have an organization called AFNA. And he gave me the directory, which had the names and addresses of every federal narcotic agent in it. So at that point, having the introduction, the entrees through Tartaglino and Fred Dick, I was able to start contacting federal narcotic agents all around the world, wherever they lived, all around the United States. And having these two guys behind me, Andy Tartaglino and Fred Dick, was the entree I needed to start talking with them. And none of them, very few of them had ever been interviewed before, and they were all very interested in talking about their experiences.
Okay.
And I decided to start at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the things that Andy Tartaglino had insisted upon when I initially went to see him, he agreed to tell me um, uh, everything I wanted to know about how the CIA infiltrated the DEA. But he said that he do all the background work first. And he said before he could possibly talk about the DEA, which was created in 1973, um, of which he was the deputy director for administration. Before he would talk to me about how the CIA infiltrated the DEA and the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, I had to go back and start from the beginning. And I had to learn all about the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which started in 1930. And I agreed to do that. And it took me like 10 years to investigate this old Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Um, as a condition for being able to then interview Tartaglino about the CIA's infiltration of these later organizations. But he said it wouldn't make any sense to me, or anybody else if I didn't have the background. So that's what I started doing. And in the course of this investigation, which took 10 years, I met federal narcotic agents who had worked for the government in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s. It was a very small organization. At any time, it only had as many as 350 agents around the world. Almost all of them were in the United States. At any one time, the Bureau of Narcotics only had 16 agents overseas. As I may have mentioned, this guy, Charlie Siragusa, opened the Bureau's first overseas office in Rome in 1951. And at that time, there was only 4 federal narcotic agents stationed overseas. Almost all of them were stationed the vast majority were stationed in New York City. That office had about anywhere between 60 to 90 federal narcotic agents. And really the history of the Bureau of Narcotics very much focuses on what happened in New York City, especially after World War II, up until 1968, when the Bureau of Narcotics was dissolved due to a corruption scandal in which over 30 agents were forced to resign and another 5 were indicted. And the Bureau of Narcotics was reorganized within the Department of Justice as the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. But I spent many years building contacts and getting to know people and interviewing people all around the country from approximately 1990 right up until I finished writing this first book, The Strength of the Wolf, in 2004.
Okay, that's awesome.